For the next part of this Boston Whaler 13 restoration, I'm going to be dealing with delamination. I'll show you what this looks like so far. I've already started getting this cleaned up. There was a lot of depression here, but what I've done is I've drilled holes into the areas, the very weak areas, and using a 60 millimeter monojet, I filled it up with an epoxy mixture, and I've injected the epoxy into all of these holes that I've drilled. I did some along the front here. It's pretty solid, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand this all down, get a smooth surface to work with, and I'm going to lay up some fiberglass on there. I'll start with a coarse layer and work up to a finer, probably five layers, and I'll be using an epoxy resin to put this the fiberglass layers on. I'm hoping it'll come out good. We'll see. After the epoxy resin dries on the fiberglass, I'm going to sand it down, and then I'll go over it with fairing compound, smooth that down, and hopefully have it next to or close to paint ready at that point. One thing I did want to point out, after you've got the initial pour or injection, if you will, of epoxy into the holes, you want to put some pressure on it. What I've done is I've got a thin piece of plastic. Epoxy doesn't stick to the plastic. Get it on there, and right now it's dry, but I'm showing you what I've done before. Get this. Now you'll notice there's some gap there. Let's zoom in on this so you can see what I'm doing. You see a bit of a gap here, and what I'll do is put just enough cardboard in there that when I weigh this down, there's going to be some pressure on it. And after that, I keep my old rotors for that reason. Just get some weight on it. The neat thing is, once the epoxy cures, it won't stick to the plastic. The plastic will peel right off. So that's one thing you want to do if you're going to go ahead and pursue doing a delamination fix on a whaler or any other boat for that matter. Got a lot more to deal with in the back. There's a hole in the anchor locker. I got to fix that. But I feel good about this project. Got an engine that's running really good for it, so we'll see. Let me get on with it, and we'll start with the sanding piece. But before we do that, let me show you what it looks like of what I've got done so far. So here's some of the holes I've drilled, and some of the epoxy fill. You can see the front. It was really empty in terms of there was nothing behind it. I went a little happy over here with the epoxy. You can see that there's a pretty thick layer, but we'll sand that off. There's still some holes we got to deal with, but that's okay. One alternate method has been to use Gorilla Glue, and the cool thing about Gorilla Glue is it expands when it contacts with water. The bad thing is, when you drill those holes, you'd have to get some water in there, and so that it activates the Gorilla Glue. And I don't know that that's a good thing. Leaving moisture behind in there is probably not the best thing in the world. But anyway, let's get on with the sanding and see how this goes. I've got a belt sander loaded with 80 grit sandpaper. Got some breathing protection and eye protection. We don't want to get that stuff in our lungs. So I'll go ahead and start sanding now. I'm going to get the worst parts first, which is over here. Alright, now it's time to blow all that dust off and get it cleaned up as much as possible for the next layer of epoxy. So I'm blowing the dust off. The next thing I'll be doing is using acetone and wiping it down, getting it clean, getting the remainder of the dust and any oils off. Alright, so here's the part where my dumb ass forgot to turn the microphone back on. But what I'm showing here is a two-part epoxy from Total Boat. Great stuff. Sets up really well. And there's no guessing as far as mixing. One pump of resin and one pump of hardener gives you the correct ratio. What I'll be showing you here in a moment is milled glass. I use this as a thickener. And you can take the epoxy from a syrupy mixture all the way to almost a stiff paste using milled glass. I would suggest you use breathing protection around it though. Nobody wants to inhale dust or ground glass dust. You want to make sure you mix your resin and hardener thoroughly. You can't overmix it, to be honest with you, but the better the mix, the better the setup will be. And I'm still mixing it, and I'll be mixing it. Now I'm going to go ahead and pour it into the little holes. Right now it's in a very loose syrupy consistency, so those remaining holes they'll fill in. I usually put a little bubble on top because it does shrink. What's left over I'll sand down. So I sped it up. I like doing that. There's no use watching somebody do a repetitive motion over and over again. But what I'm getting ready to do is thicken it up some. I'll be putting some milled glass into it, stirring it up nicely. And this is for the larger gaps or holes that I'm filling in on this boat. So what I'm about to show you on the left is the original pour that I did to fill in one of the oil lock holes. I don't plan on rowing this boat anywhere, so I don't want oil locks. I prefer a nice smooth finish. But you can see the fiberglass, the epoxy resin with the glass, or the milled glass. It's got a blue tint, and I think that's from the milled glass itself. But you can see the consistency of it, and it fills it in quite nicely. We'll sand it down, which is what I just did, and put another layer up on it. Here I've added more milled glass as a thickener and made a thick paste to fill in the areas that really need it. And in a moment you'll see what that ends up looking like at the rear of the boat. I did want to show you one other piece I did. If you can see right here, there was a huge gulf there. I guess that was a big gap. Fiberglass gel coat was chunked out. I used the let me get close up here. I actually used the epoxy mix with a heavy concentration of milled glass as a thickener, and it's actually pretty nice right now. I've got to sand it down to the point where it's almost ready for finish. Got to sand this down some more. After that I'll use some fairing compound, fill that in, sand it down with a probably 120 to 220 grit, somewhere around there, and put some primer over it. So that epoxy mix with the milled glass as a thickener, it's actually really effective. Well, I think that's it for now. I do want to show you what this looks like right now. Delamination seems to be pretty much cured. But let's look at this and do a before and after type shot. So this is what we have now. Yeah, it's not great. We're down to the fiberglass in some sections, but it's actually fairly strong. You can't depress any of this. There's a solid layer of epoxy underneath of that. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to do the glass layup on top of this. I originally thought I was. I don't think it's necessary. Any of these little minor imperfections now, they're pretty much filled in, but I'll use Fair & Compound to smooth everything out, sand it down with a finer grit, and it'll be paint ready at that point. Thanks for watching the video. I hope it's been useful to you. Stay tuned, there'll be a lot more. Got a lot of things to do with this boat, and I hope to at least this season get the interior done so we can flip it upside down, work on the hull. But if you like this video, give it a like, and if you want to follow the whole reconstruction or rehabilitation of this Boston whaler, hit follow. Thanks for watching.